Welcome and thank you for joining us today for 2023 ITOps Budgeting to Win. Use new research-based outage cost data. My name is Raleigh Gould and I'll be the moderator for today's event. Our featured speakers are Valerie O'Connell, Research Director at EMA, and Mohan Kompella, VP of Product Marketing at BigPanda. While Valerie and Mohan will defer answering your questions until the conclusion of today's event, we encourage you to log your questions anytime throughout the course of the presentation by using the Q&A functionality. Also, today's event is being recorded and you'll receive a link with some additional resources from BigPanda, so I hope you'll check that email out. And before I hand things over to today's featured speakers, I wanted to tell you a little bit more about their expertise. Valerie came to EMA with decades of senior level experience in the effective marketing of technology. She excels at making the value proposition of complex products clear in crowded markets and at equipping sales forces to strike with precision. Mohan has over 15 years of experience in IT ops and monitoring. During this time, he worked closely with large enterprise customers, IT ops and NOC teams in a variety of consulting, architecture, implementation, and pre-sales engineering roles. Prior to BigPanda, Mohan led product marketing for Lightbend. And now I'd like to go ahead and turn things over to our first featured speaker, Mohan. Take it away.
Thank you, Raleigh. Great to be here. First of all, I wanted to welcome everyone that's listening to this webinar. Appreciate your interest and appreciate the time. I wanted to talk a bit before we introduce the research and some of the findings that we uncovered. I wanted to talk maybe just for a couple of minutes about what is likely happening in your environments, right? The fact that you're here listening to this webinar probably means that you run, you manage, you lead a large IT ops, NOC, or a SRE DevOps type of team. Your primary responsibility is the prevention and the rapid resolution of outages. So I don't think you'd be surprised if I were to say that the biggest problem for IT operations that's emerged over the last few years is the fact that digital transformation fundamentally broke IT operations. Now, having said that, I should also acknowledge, especially having been in this space for more than 15 years, maybe even close to 20, that IT ops never was that easy a job. Right? I always like to think of this as the IT operations teams being these unsung heroes that obviously have a lot of stress when something breaks, but when everything's going great, no one talks to you, kind of thing. Right? So with that said, life's always been hard, but I think digital transformation made it that much harder because now you have a tsunami of machine data, IT ops machine data that is overwhelming your teams. It's overwhelming your tools, like your ticketing tools, your on-call tools, your messaging tools, and it's overwhelming the domain experts, the developers and the DevOps teams that you might be escalating issues to, which I think we can all agree is non-ideal. From an organizational standpoint, the fact that digital transformation broke IT operations really results in three very painful things. So one, outages are expensive. We all know this, downtime is expensive. Two, it's not just the expensive part, but it also has a major impact on user experience and customer satisfaction. Every minute of downtime, increases the risk that someone's unhappy. Based on the industry and the vertical that you are, it also increases the chance that you or your customers now have an incentive to switch to a competitor. And the third one is from a pure team perspective. Your teams are struggling because they're stuck in reactive firefighting with really no way out. So with all of that said, again, if you've been in this space and you manage and lead a team, what we see is that generally, savvy IT ops, NOC and SRE leaders do three things, right? They invest in their tools and their teams. They instrument and measure the performance of their teams and tools. And then by doing that, because as the cliche goes, you can't improve what you can measure. By doing, A and B, they're then able to improve the performance and the efficiency of their teams. They're able to improve their tool stack, retire redundant tools or invest in new ones, and they're able to increase the efficiencies and optimize their incident workflows. So I don't think, again, anyone would really argue with this. But there is a problem, though. There is a problem in the fact that, uh, shocking as it may seem, even some of the largest, most sophisticated organizations in the world today have a lot of difficulty in estimating what the true cost of an outage is. And it's one of those things where this is such a fundamental metric, such a fundamental input into everything that you want to do as part of a IT ops team or as a IT ops leader, that sometimes we think about the fact that not having this data is almost like trying to drive without a map, which I think most would agree is extremely difficult. And this has all kinds of downstream implications on your teams, on your planning, how you measure the value that your teams create, how you communicate that to the management, and then how do you drive, meaningful positive outcomes in terms of MTTR reduction, team efficiencies, etc. So with all of that said, let's now turn it over to Valerie from EMA, who's going to walk us through some pretty amazing findings.
Thank you, Mohan, and thank you everyone for joining us. So we're going to be talking about the cost of an IT outage, but before I get into that, I'd like to back it up and give you some of the background story. When the folks from BigPanda approached me and asked for me to do some field research on the cost of an IT outage, I'm there, really? I mean, there has to be thousands of reports and studies out there. They said, no, that really isn't true. Well, I should have just believed them, but I didn't because I'm an analyst. And I turned to Google and Googled, what is the cost of an IT outage? Now, this that I have showing on the screen right now is from last week, but a few months ago, it was no different. Finding after finding on Google, right at the top, was some variation of the following. According to Gartner, the average cost of IT downtime is $5,600 a minute. And that figure showed up from vendors, from Forbes, CIO, all kinds of places this statistic showed up. So I wanted to know, all right, let's find out more. Where did it come from? And it wasn't difficult to track down. That figure came originally from a 2014 Gartner blog, in which the analyst was not even talking about IT outage costs. He was trying to drive people to another Gartner document. So he said, somebody asked me the question of the cost of a network downtime based on industry surveys, so not even Gartner surveys. Based on industry surveys, the number we typically cite is $5,600 a minute. And it instantly became the figure that people used from 2014 on. Now, lest anybody think that I'm saying anything negative about Gartner, I'm not. One, that shows the power of Gartner, but the Gartner site itself on below the blog specifically says, all comments or opinions expressed hereunder are those of the individual contributors and do not represent the views of Gartner or its management. So kudos to Gartner, but the figure $5,160 became an urban legend of record, even though periodically sparkled in there will be references to Ponemon Institute and STIC, but the Gartner figure reigns. At least it did until BigPanda came to us. Why did BigPanda want EMA to do research? Well, as Mohan has alluded to, BigPanda is really fundamental in decreasing outages, shortening the impact, duration, etc. So they wanted to be able to help their clients with some more real-world figures than something that came from a 2014 blog casually tossed off. They wanted to have a research basis for talking about IT outage costs. And I make this point here that what we've come up with is a defensible, not definitive average cost of unplanned outages. So we surveyed over 300 global research participants. You can see over here on the right, the breakdown of managerial level. There's primarily managers, C-levels, directors, and a few non-IT executives. So we asked the questions of all 300 participants, but when it came to cost questions, we asked the question in local currency and converted over to US dollars. Before I get into the findings, I'll just mention the caveats. These cost estimates, we didn't give people specific parameters to how to answer or consider the cost of an outage. We left that to their own determination. So there are many variabilities in factors that could be used. And then there's the universal challenge to all outage averages, which is every organization is different. That being said, we did come up with a figure. According to our research, the cost of an unplanned IT outage is $12,913 per minute. That's interesting, but what's going to be more useful to you people as you try to use these figures in your own budgeting and internal discussions is that we've broken out here for you the average per minute by company size. Across the top in the dark blue, you will see the average cost per minute of unplanned outages by company size. And the buckets are 1,000 to 2,500 employees, up to more than 20,000 employees and across there. The outage cost per minute for a company sized 1,000 to 2,500 is 1,850. And for more than 20,000, it's $25,402. Now you'll notice that moving from 1,000 employees to more than 20,000 employees, there's a significant jump in each one of the categories until you get to 10,000 to 20,000 employees. There's not a big deal of difference. I mean, once you get to big, big is kind of big. You can quote me on that. That's brilliant. So in the light blue, there's the outage cost per hour by company size. And how I did that was I applied my great math skills and took the average cost per minute and multiplied by 60. I just did that for your convenience because some companies discuss outage costs in minutes and some in hours. And for your information, in the light yellow below, that's the distribution of the categories of company sizes. So for instance, 23% of our survey respondents were in the 1,000 to 2,500 employee range, and 20% were in more than 20,000. When we're talking about an unplanned outage cost, we asked what best describes your organization's approach to reporting the costs of an outage. And you'll see here that for 32%, costs are calculated for each outage. But 40% say impact and costs are estimated based on averages. 22% say that costs are only calculated when customers are impacted. You can debate the usefulness of each one of these categories, but an interesting side note is that the C-level respondents almost all thought that costs were calculated for each outage, when in fact more people are estimating. And if you're estimating, we've given you some good figures to use. Which statement best describes the cost of an outage in your organization? 44% say that it varies depending upon which applications or services are impacted. And 33% say that we're more concerned about cost when it impacts customer-facing services. That may be true, but that may not be the best approach, and we can discuss that later on. And then 20% say we treat all outages as equally significant. When it comes to the factors that go into the cost impact of an outage, we asked which factors are most important to your organization. I'm not going to go through each one of these, but I am going to ask you to take a look at the top two, which are in a virtual dead heat. Business disruption just narrowly edges out impact on employee productivity. And that makes sense because when your employee productivity is impacted, your business is impacted as well. That's why folks who said that they really only are more concerned about outages that have to do with impacting customers directly are probably being a little bit short-sighted, because employee productivity is the engine that runs the business. Most people usually expect that revenue is going to be the top impact, but that ends up just being one of the major considerations. Now, we talked about unplanned outages, cost per minute. Now, when it comes to a significant IT outage, unplanned, what constitutes a significant IT outage in your organization? 18% say any degradation in service quality. 23 get to the point where a service or application is flat unavailable. Yeah, that would count as a significant outage. Anything that impacts employee or customer experience. And then 21% say all of the above. These are the different connotations that people brought to the question. How much did the most recent significant outage cost your organization? And the average, asked in local currency and reported here in dollars, is $1,477,843 for the most significant outage, the most recent one. And as we did for you in the cost of an unplanned outage per minute, here again we've broken down the cost of the last significant outage by company size. It ranges from $257 some odd thousand for the 1,000 to 2,500 employees, all the way up to more than $3 million for a company that has more than 20,000 employees. Now, those are very big differences in numbers, but that doesn't really capture the full impact, because a smaller company, although their quantitative dollar loss may be less, it may have more of an impact. They have fewer margins for error, fewer resources to do recovery for. So an outage is important and it's significant at any level. What is interesting here in addition is that given what they said was the average cost per minute of an unplanned outage, I took that number by company size and divided it into the cost of the last significant outage to come up with a calculated duration. Again, estimates. But these estimates come out to average around 2 hours for the duration of the last significant outage. Where that becomes more interesting is if you look to the right of this slide, I flat out asked them, how long does a significant outage usually ask? And you'll see that the answers ranged from fewer than 30 minutes to a day or more, and a whole lot of things in between. What's interesting is that the average here is reported at about 1 hour, but the average as actually calculated based on the figures that they were reporting is closer to 2 hours. When I asked what is the duration of a significant outage, ITOps was answering closer to 2 hours than any other group. And that was closer to the truth. And it also makes sense because the people who are responsible for finding and fixing the problem are probably going to be more acutely aware of how long it actually takes. We also asked, how often does a significant outage happen? A bewildering 10.7% say it happens weekly. Do the math. Whatever the size of the company is, can you afford a significant outage weekly? And then you get to the kind of ephemeral yearly or almost never, and then most people are actually in between. Now I want to just take a little side trip, which the survey delved into a little bit. Which statement best describes the cost of an outage to your organization? And I'm going to be talking about AI ops and automation as offensive weapons, because right here you see 16.3% say it's increasing and it's going to continue increasing. 36% say increased reliance on IT guarantees continual increase. It's like woe is me, abandon all hope. Outages are increasing, the impact and the costs are going up. But hark, there's good news here, because lightly circled, you can see that 22% say, yeah, it's increasing, but we think we can lower the cost with AI ops and automation. And then 13% actually say it's been decreasing because of proactive systems we've put in place. AI ops and automation make a difference. On the chart on the right, I actually pulled from other research I did earlier in this year when I interviewed 400 IT leaders specifically about AI ops, and I asked, what is the top metric used to measure AI ops effectiveness in your organization? And you see here that number one, top of the list, is reduced number of outages. All right, so AI ops and automation can impact outage frequency, duration, and impact. Let's look at what this survey came up with. Just take a minute to orient you to this slide. On the left, in the dark blue, I separated out the respondents who had identified themselves as having mature, in-place, strategic, enterprise-wide AI ops implementations. And on the right, in light blue, we have those people who have AI ops implementations, but they were either early in it or taking a departmental approach. Why did I separate them out? It's because you're going to see AI ops in action against outages. I asked, what is the most common cause of an outage? Select the top two only. On the left, you see that the companies that had enterprise-wide mature AI ops, their top causes of significant outages or unplanned outages were what I call external uncontrollables: power outage, hardware failure, internet provider failure. Those are things that you can't really control. Now, let's mosey on over to the right-hand side for same question. What is the most common cause of an outage? In the departmental or early AI ops implementations, their lead causes are internal and avoidable. Number one by far is change in configuration issues, followed hot on the heels with human error, and only a distant third is power outages. So right there, in my opinion, you see AI ops in action. You can't do anything about the uncontrollables, but you can directly address the things that are controllable. So, what are my takeaways from my research here? I don't have to tell you, you don't need research to know that left unchecked, outages will continue to grow. In is $12,913 per minute, the new $5,160? That's up to you. But the modern outage is personal. The averages in this research do offer you a quantitative voice, a research-based, defensible, not definitive number that you can use in your own calculations and internal presentations. I say here that although there's no cure for IT outages, AI and automation have a strong track record of reducing outage frequency and cost because they strike at the primary controllable causes of outages. In this research alone, 23% of those respondents who had identified having mature AI ops implementation reported that their average duration of a significant outage was less than 30 minutes. So you're with me? 23% of mature AI ops implementations, outages less than 30 minutes. Otherwise, the average reported was an hour plus. And as we showed, the calculated duration as experienced was 2 hours. So the note I'd like to end on here, before I turn it over to Mohan, is that the best outage duration is the one that never happens at all. So swallow your water, Mohan, and take it over.
Thank you, Valerie. Yeah, those were very interesting charts, and like you said, we were pretty surprised to see what the cost of the outage metric looked like in 2022. I mean, it's 2x, more than 2 times what it was 8 years ago, which is no surprise. but also the fact that if you then assume that a typical outage is about an hour, I think you shared a number that says more than $1.4 million. I think you also said that most of the respondents, I think a significant majority have monthly outages. So even, just to keep the math simple, if you think about the fact that a lot of the organizations out there have at least one significant outage a month, and if each outage lasts an hour, and the cost of that is 1.4 million, you're at least looking at $14 million in downtime and outage costs per year, at least, which I think is a pretty shocking number, to be honest, right? Even for a Fortune 500 company, that is real cash that's being impacted because they're not able to reduce the frequency, the duration, and the impact of outages. So with that, earlier in the session, I talked a little bit about how if you don't have the cost of an outage, as an IT ops leader, as an IT ops manager, it's kind of like driving without a map. So I wanted to, you know, uh, unravel that string a little bit more and talk about what is it that you can do once you have this number, which you now have, right? So I wanted to show you with the product that my company BigPanda makes, how you can leverage that information to assess, plan, budget, etc., and then how to use that information to report on your IT operations teams, your tools, and your incident workflows and improve them. So with that, I am going to share my screen here. Let's see if this works.
As he's doing this, in case it's not clear to anyone, what Mohan is bravely, or fill in the blank some other word, trying to do is to go live for you, to show you a live screen. If he's successful, and it looks like he is, I will just take myself right off of video and let him take it away.
Thank you, Valerie. Yeah, as anyone that's been in a live demo knows, webinars, especially, it's like playing with fire because technology and all of that stuff. But anyway, so I wanted to show you the audience for a couple of minutes is how you can use the BigPanda platform to assess the efficiency of your IT operations teams, your tools and incident workflows, and then use the cost of an outage as an important input to then quantify the value that you and your team are creating and then communicate that across the org. And also, when it's time for budgetary planning, use this as a data-driven foundation for making the asks you need for future investments. So what you see now is the executive summary of the dashboard, the BigPanda Analytics dashboard. So we track and we let you track things like the noise reduction percentage, the MTTR breakdown, the workloads on your team, etc. And this again is the exec level dashboard. You can obviously go in a couple of levels deeper, so which I will do. So let's start with the MTTX breakdown. Again, if you've been in the space for more than a year or two, you know that it's not MTTR, of course, is the most important top line metric, but it's also other metrics like the mean time to detect, the mean time to assign, the mean time to engage, or mean time to know, and other metrics like that, which you can also measure and track with BigPanda. The other thing which I think is very, very top of mind for a lot of the IT ops leaders and the monitoring and observability leaders out there is the fact that pretty much every company out there has invested a lot of money and really blood, sweat, and tears into their monitoring fabric. And in previous surveys we've done, we actually saw that most mid to large size companies have anywhere from 8 to 15 to 20 to 25 different monitoring tools that may have been accumulated over years or sometimes even over decades. But the problem is for many of them, they don't know how well these tools are performing. They don't know they have no good way to assess the quality of the data generated by those tools, and then use that data to then decide if they should retire a tool, if they should rationalize something, or maybe make other tooling investments. So that's something else that BigPanda can also help is we ingest data from pretty much every homegrown commercial legacy off-the-shelf monitoring tool. We analyze the alert quality uh, based on what we ingest from these tools, and we can then tell you we can actually sort the quality into high, medium, and low by source. We can do additional analysis and tell you what's really adding value to your environment versus what's not, which gives you a very good data-driven foundation for deciding what your future tool stack should look like, especially in this economic environment where if you're spending millions of dollars on a bunch of monitoring tools and you think that maybe it's time to rationalize it a little bit, then BigPanda can actually help you do that. And the last one I wanted to leave you with is what we can do with helping you understand how your ITOps, NOC, and SRE teams are performing. Again, if you're a medium-sized org, you probably have a single NOC or ITOps team. If you're a larger company, if you're a Fortune 1000 or a Global 5000 entity, you probably have ITOps teams and NOCs in multiple locations. You probably have multiple shifts. And it's likely that the performance across locations and across teams varies widely, right? So what BigPanda does is it helps you calibrate and measure and track the performance of your teams across various dimensions. I won't get into all of that now. And then once you do that, you can then understand why certain teams are better than the others, what lessons can you learn, how can you improve the efficiencies, and so on and so forth. So again, there's a lot more from a dashboard perspective here, but just in the interest of time, I will stop there and stop sharing my screen so we can take any questions from the audience.
Well, Mohan, before you do that, you've got tons of time left. So one of the questions I would like to ask, even though I know the answer, is you talk about BigPanda being able to report on the quality of the performance of other monitoring tools. Can you take just a moment, and this isn't for those of you watching, this isn't scripted. I just think it's a really telling point of what BigPanda can do for you, and you've kind of skated by it. So can you tell them on what basis BigPanda, defines the quality of monitoring?
Yeah, absolutely. So I think there's a couple of ways to talk about it. Let me see what's the simplest way. Yeah, all right. So I would say broadly, when it comes to monitoring tools, I always think of it as the good news, the bad news scenario, right? The good news is that in some part of your infrastructure, some part of your application stack, before you invested in a new monitoring or observability tool, you had no visibility and you're probably flying blind, right? So the good news is that now this one tool that you added to your tool stack now gives you a lot of visibility into that application, those services, that part of your network, etc. Right? Now the bad news is these tools are just too good at what they do in the sense that they are amazing at generating tons of gigabytes of, maybe more events and alerts and logs and metrics and traces and all kinds of information that'll probably keep a pretty large IT ops team busy for years and years. But that's not why you bought them. That's not why you bought those tools. You bought those tools because you wanted to get actionable intelligence. You wanted to get actionable alert data from that. You don't want to know when, again, to use a very cliched legacy example, you don't want to know that the CPU on one of your key servers varied between 30 and 40% and went up and down 1,000 times. What you do want to know is when that CPU breaches a critical threshold, which is likely going to slow down the performance of a critical application that's running on that server. So that is, I think, one measure of the quality of the data that's coming from that tool. Like how much noise is it generating and how well are you able to then sift through the noise to find that actionable data, right? That's one. The other measure is, which is also another very important metric for assessing quality, is what kind of contextual data are you able to associate or add to those alerts coming out of those tools? I think if you've been in IT ops for any amount of time, you know that not having context is one of the worst things. If, let's say, you're a retailer and you get 1,000 alerts from 1,000 different stores, if you're able to tell that one of those alerts is from your flagship store in Times Square, generating $300,000 in sales on an hourly basis, you probably want to prioritize that versus an alert that you get from some other store that's probably generating $1,000 an hour in revenue. So the ability to associate and add rich contextual information to that alert data is, I think, the other uh, barometer of alert quality. There's obviously a lot of nuances. I'm trying to oversimplify that, of course, but so what we're able to do is, because we can ingest data from any monitoring tool, we're able to take all of that data, we sift through the noise, drop the false positives, drop the informational stuff, drop all the duplicates, which is another huge problem. And then we're able to drop things like alerts from maintenance devices or nodes under maintenance windows, and so on and so forth. And then we're able to then look at the quality of the context that we're able to associate or add. And at the end of the day, we can tell you, we bucket the quality into high, medium, low, and then help you take action on that.
Great. Thank you.
Sure.
So is it now back to Raleigh?
Yes, it sounds like it's time for questions. So before we do that, I did want to let all our audience members know about these additional resources from BigPanda. I will include these in the follow-up email, so I hope you'll check out these insightful resources. I'm going to go ahead and jump into the questions.
But
The
Raleigh,
first one-
Raleigh, before you do, so you said you're going to send these, you're going to send the links, right?
Yes, and the PDF of the PowerPoint.
Right. And I
Okay.
highly recommend you go get the ebook because I wrote it. I think it's very interesting. So now I'll be
I'll
quiet.
second
Raleigh.
that. Yeah.
Great. Well, I will provide the links. So again, go ahead and check those resources out. The first question I'm going to throw out to both of you. Is there any data on the impact of CMDB used to help improve reduction of MTTR?
There's no research from this particular study. That's not something we were looking at. In other research that EMA has done, there is a significant amount of data that correlates CMDB use if it's current, if the information is current, accurate, and accessible, that it highly correlates with IT effectiveness and things like that. So I mean, EMA has research that supports that theory. Nothing specific to this research initiative. Mohan, what do you have to say?
Yeah, that's a good question. So I would say I'm going to make an assumption here that the questioner wants to know, with a CMDB, obviously you get all kinds of interesting topology data, service mapping data, and other operational context, which you would then use to enrich that data that's coming in from your monitoring sources. And then you use that to either correlate that data and detect things faster, or maybe help your IT ops team triage something very quickly, or maybe even uncover the probable root cause, right? All kinds of fascinating downstream implications of having good enrichment data from CMDBs and other sources. The way we see it is that I think the CMDB is increasingly one of the many sources of enrichment data. It used to be that 10 years ago, unless you had an accurate, up-to-date CMDB, you were kind of lost. But I don't think that's the case anymore. So now you have all kinds of other sources. You have flow maps, you have service maps, you obviously have a CMDB, you might have an inventory or asset management system. A lot of times we see that customers actually have CSVs that have been exported from other systems periodically, that kind of enrichment data. So BigPanda is able to tap into all of those sources, not just the CMDB. And then we're able to tell you how useful that data was. to enrich your monitoring alerts, which then again, like I said, has other downstream positive implications. So obviously we don't have, research the way EMA might have research for other topics, but we do have data from other customers, and we do offer dashboards in the product I showed you before to help you assess some of that.
And just on an end note on the topic, conversationally and in the press, you hear, oh, CMDB, it's going away. EMA Research does not support that. We've asked it in lots of different practice areas and different research initiatives. And in fact, most organizations are saying that the importance of the CMDB is rising. Now, some of the challenges to it are changing, and there are more things to consider, especially with ephemeral items, but that's a whole different conversation. CMDBs themselves, though, are still very important and growing in importance. All right, next question, Ollie.
Mohan, the outage cost information is good, and I can see how it will be useful, but they'd like to get more detailed information regarding getting a budget. What recommendations do you have?
Yeah, so it's a good question, something that I think we get asked a lot. So from a BigPanda perspective, when customers ask us that question, we approach it two ways. If it's someone who is not a BigPanda user, we actually help do something called a business value assessment for them. So we have a pretty robust model that has a lot of inputs that we gather from real organizations about their teams, the frequency of P1s, P0s, P2s, P3s in their environment, broken down by BU, et cetera, many, many different inputs. And then we use all of that data to actually tell them, give them some very realistic projections on what they can expect to see in terms of cost savings and improved efficiencies, which these teams can then use to either make a case for new investments or use it for budgetary planning. And the other thing that we do is also once someone actually deploys BigPanda, and we are 6 to 12 months in, we can also do something called a business value realization, where we tell them about the impact of the improved workflows, the increased tool efficiencies, and the impact of BigPanda on them. So there's again a lot more to unpack there, but we do have some models to help customers.
Excellent. Thank you, Mohan. The next question is, you talked about the growing number of monitoring and observability tools. Many of them say they do AIOps. What does BigPanda do that they can't?
That's another fantastic question. Again, something that we get asked a lot. So I would say that with the observability tool stack or the monitoring tool stack, depending on your perspective, I think they're very good at generating large volumes of system data, like I was saying a few minutes ago. But I think they kind of struggle to extract that actionable intelligence or those actionable alerts from that. And this, I think, causes a lot of frustration and heartburn because often these tools are expensive and they also reflect years of investment. Now, in the last couple of years, what a lot of observability monitoring tool vendors are doing is they're incorporating AI, machine learning, or in some cases, maybe elements of data science to try to parse some of the data that they get, maybe do things like linear regressions to tell you, how a certain metric might be trending in the future. And broadly, they're all clubbed in this bucket, the AIOps bucket, which I think I would, again, these are great tools, by the way, don't get me wrong, and they're fantastic at what they do. But I think each one is siloed and they're unable to see the bigger picture because they're so focused on one part of the stack. And I think we know but in modern IT stacks, when there's a problem, there's generally one root cause, but 1,000 symptoms generated by 1,000 different tools. So the way BigPanda thinks of AIOps is as an AIOps platform, we're able to ingest that noisy data from each of those siloed observability monitoring tools, and then apply AI machine learning to all of that signal data, correlate it, and tell you what's broken. Tell you that something is broken, which is detection or MTTD. That's how you measure it. Then we tell you the best way, the easiest, fastest way to triage it. And then also surface something called the probable root cause that's behind that incident or outage. So that's how we think of AI ops, and that's how BigPanda thinks of the value that an AI ops platform is able to create.
Great insights. Thank you. And to wrap up, what about automation? What does BigPanda do there?
Yeah, automation is one of those very, very interesting things in the area of IT operations. And I think it really means, two different things, right, at a very high level. The first one is, what are all the different manual incident response actions that an IT ops, NOC, or SRE team has to do? Could be something super, super simple, like manually creating a ticket in your ITSM tool, which is slow, which could be error prone, which is not really scalable when you have, let's say, hundreds of tickets on a weekly basis. So one part of automation, which is what BigPanda does, is it automates all of those manual incident response steps. And the second part of it is, okay, so that's great, right? I mean, obviously you now have better efficiencies, your teams are faster, more productive, you're uh, cutting critical seconds, minutes off of your MTTR metric. But that's not all. What you want to do then is, then you want to say, how do I then remedy that incident? How do I resolve that incident quickly? So the second part of automation is we are flexible enough to support pretty much any auto remediation tool that you might have. You might have a commercial tool, you might have various open source auto remediation tools, or you might have a homegrown auto remediation tool, right? There's no one size fits all. So BigPanda's integrations are flexible enough that we can connect to pretty much any auto remediation tool out there and close that loop. So you get noisy data from a monitoring observability tool. We correlate all of that, tell you what's wrong. We automate all the manual actions. And as the last step, kick off an auto remediation script in your tool of choice to resolve that incident and bring you back home.
Great. Thanks for providing that clarification. And I wanted to thank you, Valerie and Mohan, for taking those questions. I also wanted to thank the audience for taking time out of your schedule to join us today. As I mentioned, you will be receiving a follow-up email with these great, insightful resources, so please check them out. And I hope we'll see you at a future EMA Research webinar. Thank you again for joining us, and enjoy the rest of your day.
Thank you, Raleigh. Thank you, Valerie. Bye.
Thanks, everyone.
Bye-bye.
Bye.